Welcome to Readers of the Lost Art with your presenter, Dr. Paul Anthony Taylor, a recovering academic. And the title of today's talk is Frankenstein's Power, the Promethean Fire in Our Souls. Well, hi everybody, and I'll say it before you do. It's like looking in the mirror. The end of this week, I'm going to be doing a live stream on the topic of Frankenstein, so I thought it would be good to do some background context. And it's quite ambitious. I hope it works. But as you can see from this image, I'm really interested and always have been in the electricity, power, lightning, light theme of Frankenstein. And it's a multi-layered novel, so I can't hope to cover everything. We'll do more in the live stream, and please do speak up in the comments if you want more material on Frankenstein. Quite happy to do a really close reading. But for today, what I wanted to do was look at some background context that people either aren't aware of or just never been exposed to. So there are many layers which I'll go through, but one aspect is the link to the Prometheus myth. So the subtitle of the book is The Modern Prometheus, so I'm not just making it up. Mary Shelley explicitly refers to it. And then the epigraph, the first beginning dedicatory quote in the book, is from John Milton's Paradise Lost. So I'll be talking about the whole Prometheus myth, which is really interesting, the multi-layers that exist with that. There's the Milton, and then I wanted to expand it to talk about Promethean figures, not just in Frankenstein, but in other works of literature. So Moby Dick, Captain Ahab is an obvious one. So I won't spend a lot of time, but I just want to show some of these links. We're also doing Moby Dick in a live stream, so I'll go into lots of depth on Moby Dick in future. So forgive me for just making a few references. And then, of all the contemporary writers I can think of to try and bring Frankenstein up to date to more recent times, there aren't many modern writers that I like, I'll admit. I'm really old-fashioned. I always joke that, novels ended in the 1920s with Proust and Ulysses, James Joyce. But if I was going to nominate any modern writer, it would be Cormac McCarthy, the American writer. And mostly I'll be referring to Blood Meridian and how that's got Promethean themes, particularly the concept of lightning and the electricity in the, I think it's New Mexico desert sky, but also in some of his other works. So I think there's The Orchard Keeper and Sutri. There's various works he did where he seems really interested in the concept of lightning and light. And all of these issues I want to explore, but with reference to Frankenstein specifically, there are so many layers to it. So I'll be following quite closely its links to the whole notion of Prometheus stealing fire and giving it to mankind. But in some ways, the story of Frankenstein as told by Mary Shelley is a reverse Prometheus story. Because in the original myth, as we'll see, Prometheus brings fire to mankind, and Prometheus has humankind's best interests at heart. And because of that, Zeus, the overwhelming supreme god, he punishes Prometheus basically for looking out too much for humankind. Whereas Dr. Frankenstein in the novel doesn't look out for his creation, doesn't look out for his creature. And in that way, he's a failed, negative type of Prometheus figure. And I'll talk more later on about Mary Shelley. I think Frankenstein, in a certain sense, like I said, there are many layers, but one layer is, it's actually quite, not in a nasty way, but I think it's a bit of a snipe at men and their obsessions. Because in the original Prometheus myth, notice she calls it the modern Prometheus. But in the original myth, which I'll relate to you in detail, humankind is punished for the acts of Prometheus, giving them fire, by being given women, or in particular Pandora, and then from Pandora all future women. And the way Zeus is quite a misogynist, the way it's described, his punishment of men with this gift of women. And I think at many levels there are various aspects, but was specifically the gender wars. I think Mary Shelley was presenting Victor Frankenstein as, for want of a better literary term, a bit of a wimp. And that was her perhaps pointed rejoinder to the idea that women are a punishment to men. So, other aspects I can think off the top of my head. Again, the female angle as a female writer, the issue about when you create something being responsible for it. So men, I can relate to this. We have our little pet obsessions, and then the minute we're done with them, we move on to the next obsession. So we're not very good at looking after our creations. My personal experience of this, out of many fads I've had, I mastered, just to give you a daft example, I mastered sourdough bread from start to finish, had a culture going. I used a Dutch oven within my main oven, little tricks like ice cubes in the Dutch oven to get it to rise more quickly. The constant kneading and resting and all these. I had a little cabinet that was temperature controlled for proving the dough, and a whole performance. And then I perfected it without boasting. I did a really good sourdough loaf, which isn't easy to make it look good. You know, use the razor blade to slice it before you stick it in the oven to get a nice split on it. All these things. And then soon after I'd mastered it, I just lost interest, because this is, I think, partly the male psychology, how we pursue things, and that'll pursuit will be a theme throughout the novel Frankenstein. And Mary Shelley's perspective on male obsessions and the male scientific attitude. There's the whole concept of why is Frankenstein, why does it, this will be the theme of the live stream, but why is it that the creature never dies in the imagination of generation after generation? And one of my arguments will be it's because it ties into the notion of the Promethean myth. And myths don't die because they capture an essence of truth that are very close to people's deep atavistic sense. And Frankenstein, I think she aptly named it the Modern Prometheus, because the novel takes on part of that mythology. It adopts from ancient Greek mythology and takes it into the future. And I think that's why, even when people don't get all the references, or even when people only have a relatively superficial understanding, I think it accounts for why there are just endless films, endless, reimaginations of, or reimaginings, I should say, of the Frankenstein story. The creature really never dies. So there's the creation and responsibility theme. There's fate versus the supernatural. There's the lightning has so many, that you can see in this image, has so many notions, giving the spark of life, but also the spark of intuition. So the whole theme of knowledge, and the lightning representing sparks of intuition or flashes from up in the heavens. So we'll be talking about Zeus. But in Mary Shelley's story, it's all about trying to get into the deepest mysteries of science. But the way it's portrayed is Dr. Frankenstein does it in quite a magically alchemistic orientated way. So it's science, but not as we know it. Isn't that a phrase from Star Trek? Anyway, that it is science, but it's science in quite a gothic, mythical way. And I think that's why the novel just appeals so much. So this is, without wittering on any more, I'll be talking later about St. Elmo's Fire, and with reference to Moby Dick, because I'll be broadening out the Frankenstein's Prometheus links. I'll be referring at the very end to Cormac McCarthy, but there's also Captain Ahab in Moby Dick, and there's also John Milton's Paradise Lost. The epigraph to Frankenstein is a quote from Paradise Lost, being a fallen Adam. But this is the power that's being sought by Dr. Frankenstein. This is a Tesla coil. And it's now rattling around in my head. Wasn't there a song by Orchestral Manoeuvres in the Dark, Tesla Girls? But anyway, completely irrelevant point. This is, I think the Tesla coil is referred to as a resonant electrical transformer. But what it can do is it creates, in an electrically charged atmosphere, what you're seeing are plasma filaments. So what's interesting is the plasma is not actually an electrical charge that can hurt you. That's lightning. But these are manifestations of a highly charged atmosphere. And a highly charged atmosphere, I think, is a good description of Frankenstein, the novel. All the emotionality, the anger of various people, especially Victor Frankenstein in his battle with the creature. But this, I think, is a good portrayal in image form of what underlies people's interest in the Frankenstein story, this magical element, this is the manifestation of the underlying electrical charge that Dr. Frankenstein is seeking, the spark to life. And if you think I'm just, wittering on and making this up, there is, at the very start of the book, which I'll quote very shortly, the young, I think is he 15, Victor Frankenstein sees a tree being destroyed by lightning and then goes to speak to his father. What is? He goes up to the tree afterwards and it's just completely, it's not a stump, it's completely demolished. And he's fascinated by this, so he asks his father. And then there's the parental issues. His father basically begets this interest in science. There's a lot of begetting of things, or parentage, or lack of parenting, that's a theme in Frankenstein. And I just like this image because also we're going to be talking about Zeus, the god who, quite a mardy bloke who always sends down thunderbolts and lightning, very, very frightening and all that. But the idea that the sky and the earth, it's where things like lightning, it's one of those rare occasions that there's a unification of the heavens and the earth. And when we look at Moby Dick, if you think of the sky as almost an inversion of the sea, and then in the actual novel Frankenstein, there's constant reference to the North Pole as this endless light and this desolate, empty arena. And that reminds me of the sky in a way. There are these areas from which knowledge is either sought or comes. And finally, when we look at Moby Dick, the idea of lightning striking a tree, there's St. Elmo's fire. There is this plasma phenomenon in a key scene, I think it's chapter 19, called The Candles, where Captain Ahab is holding on to the lightning chains that are supposed to take lightning away from the ship. And there's a St. Elmo's fire effect all the way through across the mast. So all of these themes I'm trying to link together to show you how they just are all imbricated. They're all woven in the rich history of literature. And I think that's what makes Frankenstein so resonant with people. So to get straight to the myth of Prometheus, Hesiod, I'll quote from this, and this is one of the earliest sources. So Hesiod was around about the same time as Homer. So one of the first written representations or depictions of the Greek myths are in some of these works. So Theogony, or in Greek Theogonia, and then he did another work called Works and Days. So Hesiod I'll be quoting from because that's quite a good, very early description of what Prometheus was all about. So remember, just to reiterate, the novel Frankenstein is the subtitle, The New Prometheus. So to understand the new Prometheus, I think it's good to understand what the old Prometheus was all about, to show how Mary Shelley played with the idea. Then, as I mentioned, we've got Milton, Paradise Lost, because that brings loads of issues like the creature, Frankenstein's creature, but for different reasons. Lucifer comes away from heaven. He's ejected from heaven for being rebellious. And the irony is the creature is rebellious only after he tries to have a mate made for him, and then he offers to leave Dr. Frankenstein alone. So the creature's not particularly rebellious. So there are parallels with things like Paradise Lost, but there are also key differences. When the monster, the creature, I shouldn't say the monster because it's not the monster's fault he's a monster, it's the creature, or the creation of Dr. Frankenstein. When he calls himself this fallen Adam, there are parallels with the Genesis story, Adam and Eve leaving the Garden of Eden. There's the ejection of Lucifer from heaven in Milton's Paradise Lost. There are all these notions of being banished, and I think that is it's complicated because sometimes the depictions chime with each other, and sometimes Mary Shelley is doing something different, which is again one of the layers of interest of the novel. It takes themes like Prometheus, but it plays with them and it inverts them to some extent. And then there's Melville's Moby Dick, because that is a Promethean character, Captain Ahab, because he defies, just like Prometheus defies Zeus and steals fire, just like Lucifer defies God and is banished. Captain Ahab is this Promethean character who basically, I'll give you quotes where he's defying the heavens, and it's a very powerful imagery. And then Cormac McCarthy, Blood Meridian, is, I think, one of the best books of the 20th century, best novels of the 20th century. And I'll quote from a few more of his works, because lightning is a common theme. The notion of storms, lightning, revelation, literally and metaphorically through sudden flashes of light. I think Cormac McCarthy is a stunning writer. And then these are the people, just to so you don't get worried. Aeschylus, Lord Byron, Goethe, Percy Shelley, Mary Shelley's husband, or eventual husband, they all wrote about Prometheus, but there just isn't time. If you're interested in the comments and you want more information on this stuff, happy to do more. So this is from the introduction to the 1831 edition, and the 1818 edition is, most scholars say, the better one to read. But anyway, this is from the introduction to the 1831. Invention, it must be humbly admitted, does not consist in creating out of void, but out of chaos. The materials must, in the first place, be afforded. It can give form to dark, shapeless substances, but cannot bring into being the substance itself. In all matters of discovery and invention, even of those that appertain to the imagination, we are continually reminded of the story of Columbus and his egg. Invention consists in the capacity of seizing on the capabilities of a subject, and in the power of moulding and fashioning ideas suggested by it. So I think the Columbus references, Columbus, it's from The Life and Voyages of Christopher Columbus by Washington Irving. He tells the story that Columbus challenged his men to stand an egg up on its end, and obviously the egg just keeps falling over. So then Columbus smashes the egg and puts the egg on its broken part, and thereby completely recalibrating the nature of the problem. And that the way she says the power of moulding, I've emboldened the bits I think are most relevant. The power of moulding, one of the aspects of Prometheus is that he was alleged to have created various versions of the myth, but Prometheus is supposed to have made humankind on the orders of Zeus from mud. So it's very much like the Genesis story in the Bible. So there's that creation, and obviously Dr. Frankenstein creates the creature from various body parts, not mud, but it's this golem-like figure. But the way Mary Shelley talks about creating out of void does not consist in creating out of void, but out of chaos. And the myths are about, so the Theogony by Hesiod is all about how order was created from chaos, and it can give form to dark, shapeless substances. So right from the get-go, this is in her description of, some of her motivations for writing. There's a very mythical element to it all. My imagination, unbidden, possessed and guided me, gifting the successive images that arose in my mind with a vividness far beyond the usual bounds of reverie. I saw with shut eyes but acute mental vision. I saw the pale student of unhallowed arts kneeling beside the thing he had put together. I saw the hideous phantasm of a man stretched out, and then, on the working of some powerful engine, show signs of life and stir with an uneasy, half-vital motion. Frightful must it be, for supremely frightful would be the effect of any human endeavour to mock the stupendous mechanism of the creator of the world. So, just to remind you, this is from the introduction to the 31 edition, and she made quite a few changes on the back of criticisms of the original 1818 edition, And most scholars tend to argue that the later edition was too it made it not, it wasn't as morally ambiguous. It made Victor Frankenstein seem more like a victim of fate rather than of the consequences of his own decisions. So arguably she wimped out a bit because of the critical feedback. So that's why most scholars say read the 1818 edition. But I still think the introduction to the later edition is interesting. And she's talking here, she summarises this endeavour to mock the stupendous mechanism of the creator of the world. And I'll be talking later, I'll just briefly broach on the notion of Gnosticism, the idea that there's the demiurge, there is this mechanistic creator of the world who thinks he's the supreme being but isn't. There's a supreme being above the demiurge, the creator, and the true supreme being is the master of spiritual matter, pure being, rather than this creative physical world. But this notion of the hideous phantasm of a man stretched out, the frightfulness of creation, his success would terrify the artist. He would rush away from his odious handiwork, horror-stricken. He would hope that, left to itself, the slight spark of life which he had communicated would fade, that this thing which had received such imperfect animation would subside into dead matter, and he might sleep in the belief that the silence of the grave would quench forever the transient existence of the hideous corpse which he had looked upon as the cradle of life. He sleeps, but he is awakened. He opens his eyes. Behold, the horrid thing stands at his bedside, opening his curtains and looking on him with yellow, watery, but speculative eyes. So this is the real Gothic quality of her writing, even in the introduction. And one thing, so there's the spark of life, which I'll be talking about with reference to electricity and lightning. I've already mentioned this, the mocking of the mechanism of the creator of the world. There's a huge creator versus created theme in Frankenstein. But one thing I'd ask you to think about from this section, from her own words, I think you can read what she's saying here a bit more metaphorically. She's talking about this nightmare scenario. But I think you could also see, and this is my personal interpretation, this fear of the horrid thing that stands at his bedside. Yes, in the novel it manifests as this creature that he absolves himself from responsibility for. But I also think, I interpret this also as referring in a way to life itself, our own lives, and the monsters and the creatures that we create. How about there are memories, there are regrets that come back to haunt us? Because as we go through life, we're constantly creating our own life, and often we don't take responsibility for our own creations. And I think that, I haven't really seen that written many places. It's a thought that came to me. It's one of the few original thoughts I have when I'm reading this stuff out. But it struck me that maybe is another reason why the Frankenstein story is so haunting. We don't have to think consciously that it's about regret, it's about our own lives, because it's projected onto this Gothic manifestation of a monster. But perhaps, it works at another level too. So this is the very beginning of the novel. Robert Walton, the explorer who's going to the North Pole, who picks Dr. Frankenstein up off an iceberg at the end. So he's writing to, I think this is his sister, "You will rejoice to hear that no disaster has accompanied the commencement of an enterprise which you have regarded with such evil forebodings." And I don't want to get into all the gender wars, but it is interesting, Mary Shelley being a woman, and she's depicting this male obsession. So we'll see how Robert Walton is obsessed about going to the North Pole. But also just in one of the very first sentences, you're getting this idea that his sister, a woman, had evil forebodings. She knew this wouldn't end well. She feared this obsessive search for knowledge at the ends of the earth, at the North Pole. "I try in vain to be persuaded that the pole is the seat of frost and desolation. it ever presents itself to my imagination as the region of beauty and delight. There, Margaret, the sun is forever visible, its broad disk just skirting the horizon and diffusing a perpetual splendour. There, for with your leave, my sister, I will put some trust in preceding navigators. There, snow and frost are banished, and, sailing over a calm sea, we may be wafted to a land surpassing in wonders and in beauty every region hitherto discovered on the habitable globe. Its productions and features may be without example, as the phenomena of the heavenly bodies undoubtedly are in those undiscovered solitudes. So one thing I'd ask you to bear in mind for later on when we look at Cormac McCarthy, and if anyone's familiar with Cormac McCarthy's work, it's interesting how when he describes lightning or storms in the desert, it's often he refers to the rim of the world or the edge of the horizon. And that's a theme that you can see here, the broad disk just skirting the horizon. But the concept of the desolate, the frost, the emptiness, the abstract nature of the thing he's after, I think, again, is a metaphor for science and knowledge. Pure knowledge, pure scientific knowledge is abstract. It's equations, it's abstractions from physical reality so that you can then manipulate reality. But the phenomena of the heavenly bodies undoubtedly are in these undiscovered solitudes. So key themes: solitude, the undiscovered, this obsession to go where no man has gone before. So he continues, what may not be expected in a country of eternal light. So again, light is this metaphor for knowledge. I may there discover the wondrous power which attracts the needle, in other words, magnetism, and may regulate 1,000 celestial observations that require only this voyage to render their seeming eccentricities consistent forever. So there's no eccentricity allowed. What science does is reduce everything to the predictable, the consistent forever. I shall satiate my ardent curiosity with a sight of a part of the world never before visited, and may tread a land never before imprinted by the foot of man. This constant desire to go where no man has gone before. I am obsessed with Star Trek today, aren't I? These are my enticements, and they are sufficient to conquer all fear of danger or death, and to induce me to commence this laborious voyage with the joy of a child feels when he embarks in a little boat. Which is, again, I think Mary Shelley's taking a little snipe at the male psyche, with his holiday mates on an expedition of discovery up his native river. But supposing all these conjectures to be false, you cannot contest the inestimable benefit which I shall confer on all mankind to the last generation by discovering a passage near the pole to those countries, to reach which at present so many months are requisite, or by ascertaining the secret of the magnet, which, if at all possible, can only be effected by an undertaking such as mine. So it's interesting, there are parallels with Dr. Frankenstein. He's looking for excuses. He's going to benefit humankind by this noble gesture, whilst at the same time he is admitting, at least partially, with the joy of a child feels when he embarks in a little boat. It's the basic men never grow up, the childish wish to explore, disguised within the scientific realm of knowledge. So remember, this was the image of the tree being destroyed. And this is in the actual novel. When I was about 15 years old, we had retired to our house near Bellerive when we witnessed a most violent and terrible thunderstorm. It advanced from behind the mountains of Jura, and then the thunder burst at once with frightful loudness from various quarters of the heavens. I remained while the storm lasted, watching its progress with curiosity and delight. As I stood at the door, on a sudden I beheld a stream of fire issue from an old and beautiful oak, which stood about 20 yards from our house, and so soon as the dazzling light vanished, the oak had disappeared, and nothing remained but a blasted stump. When we visited it the next morning, we found the tree shattered in a singular manner. It was not splintered by the shock, but entirely reduced to thin ribbons of wood. I never beheld anything so utterly destroyed. So it's this destructive power of technology and the knowledge behind the technology is obviously portrayed here. The dazzling light, it's always about the light, and also the violent and terrible thunderstorm. So this is in preparation when we look at Prometheus through Hesiod's eyes, from ancient Greek eyes. Zeus is this most terrible, violent and terrible thunderstorm. So the ancient Greeks had Zeus. We have the desire to find the science behind what appears as a violent and terrible thunderstorm, dazzling light, and this destructive power. The catastrophe of this tree excited my extreme astonishment, and I eagerly inquired of my father the nature and origin of thunder and lightning. He replied, electricity, describing at the same time the various effects of that power. So this is the search. Robert Walton, the explorer going to the North Pole, who finds Dr. Frankenstein, similarly is looking for the secret of magnetism. Victor Frankenstein is fascinated here by the power of electricity, but also the fathering, the father gives him the information. The father, in that sense, Victor Frankenstein, yes, he has his own curiosity, but he's also the creature of his father's encouraging him in that direction almost. And then this is when he's at university. Victor Frankenstein talks to one of the professors, Professor Waldman. The ancient teachers of this science, said he, promised impossibilities and performed nothing. The modern masters promise very little. They know that metals cannot be transmuted and that the elixir of life is a chimera. But these philosophers, whose hands seem only made to dabble in dirt and their eyes to pore over the microscope or crucible, have indeed performed miracles. They penetrate into the recesses of nature and shew how she works in her hiding places. They ascend into the heavens. They have discovered how the blood circulates and the nature of the air we breathe. They've acquired new and almost unlimited powers. They can command the thunders of heaven, mimic the earthquake, and even mock the invisible world with its own shadows. So this is all almost the revenge of Prometheus. This is modern science wanting to penetrate into the recesses of nature, take over the realm of the gods, the knowledge that was previously reserved for the gods, and shew how she works in her hiding places. They ascend into the heavens. It's this rejection of traditional godlike power that science pursues. And I also think what I've emboldened there, they penetrate into the recesses of nature. It's a brilliant description of the scientific method and the purpose of science. But it's this desire to be godlike. They can command the thunders of heaven. So as we'll see when we look at Zeus in Hesiod, this is the desire, like Prometheus, to find a way around the gods, or like Lucifer in Paradise Lost. It's a defiance of the gods, and we'll see defiance from Captain Ahab of the powers of nature and the god, basically, in Moby Dick. So this is the creature talking now. I pitied Frankenstein. My pity amounted to horror. I abhorred myself. But when I discovered that he, the author at once of my existence and of its unspeakable torments, dared to hope for happiness, that while he accumulated wretchedness and despair upon me, he sought his own enjoyment in feelings and passions from the indulgence of which I was forever barred, then impotent envy and bitter indignation filled me with an insatiable thirst for vengeance. I recollected my threat and resolved that it should be accomplished. I knew that I was preparing for myself a deadly torture, but I was the slave, not the master of an impulse which I detested, yet could not disobey. And we'll see this, I was preparing for myself a deadly torture. Prometheus is tortured, as we'll see very shortly. So I think this resonates with the Prometheus myth. And also, you'll see here, so I think he's talking, he kills his Elizabeth. Yet when she died, nay, then I was not miserable. I had cast off all feelings, subdued all anguish, to riot in the excess of my despair. Evil thenceforth became my good. Urged thus far, I had no choice but to adapt my nature to an element which I had willingly chosen. The completion of my demoniacal design became an insatiable passion. Again, this is the male obsession with method and scientific exploration, that the creature is almost a manifestation or portrayal of that. But he also uses very specific language. Evil thenceforth became my good. It's in Book 4 of Paradise Lost. The phrase used is by Lucifer, all good to me is lost, evil be thou my good. So I think Shelley's directly referencing that. Again, this is the monster. Oh, sorry, I keep saying the monster. Naughty me, sorry. The creature, right at the very end of the novel. But soon he cried with sad and solemn enthusiasm, I shall die, and what I now feel be no longer felt. Soon these burning miseries will be extinct. I shall ascend my funeral pile triumphantly and exult in the agony of the torturing flames, which is Prometheus-like when Prometheus describes his own punishment in quite defiant terms. The light of that conflagration will fade away, my ashes will be swept into the sea by the winds, my spirit will sleep in peace, or if it thinks, it will not surely think thus, farewell. He sprung from the cabin window as he said this upon the ice raft which lay close to the vessel. He was soon borne away by the waves and lost in darkness and distance. And that's the very end of the book, and I think it's interesting, lost in darkness and distance. The whole book up until then is about conquering darkness and distance. And I'd argue the myths from the Greeks onwards, and books like Moby Dick and Cormac McCarthy's work, they're all about engaging, like myth does, with the psychological relationship human beings have to darkness and distance in a more imaginative way, not just the scientific way of trying to conquer them. I think literature and myth tries to coexist with darkness and distance, and that's one of its powers. So, quite a bit of progress so far, but now to link all this with Hesiod and to show you the background. So I wanted to show you the Frankenstein material first, because that is it shows you that the links are there. If I started off with Hesiod and all the ancient Greek myths, it might be a bit bothersome, whereas hopefully by showing you what's in just excerpts from the novel, you'll be more convinced and be prepared to engage with the Hesiod stuff. So his two major works, Theogony and Working Days, and as you can see, he was a contemporary of Homer. So Iapetus brought home the daughter of Ocean, enticing, beautiful, ankled Clymene. So yes, nothing like a nice ankle. And she bore him these three children. Atlas, strong-hearted. Municios, obsessed with fame. Prometheus, with pre-planning, clever. In hindsight, ignorant. Epimetheus, sorry. Can't get false teeth back in. Epimetheus. So Epimetheus first brought suffering to working men when he accepted the gift. Zeus's woman moulded in the form of a young virgin. And I'll explain all the ins and outs of this, so to speak. So arrogant Municius, blasted into darkness by far-seeing Zeus, with a flash of lightning and the lingering smell of sulphur, destroyed by his reckless, out-of-control aggression. So these are the children, and why I'm showing you this is Epimetheus is often not known, but he's the brother of Prometheus. So Prometheus means forethought, so pre-planning. Epimetheus is afterthought, it's hindsight, and so he's always responding one stage too late. And that's the combination of Prometheus and Epimetheus is human nature. It's how we struggle. So this is the context. I think it's an important context that often gets passed over when people are talking about Prometheus. But also the Municius blasted into darkness by far-seeing Zeus. It's very like when we get to Paradise Lost, Lucifer being expelled from heaven. So I just thought that was an interesting, the way some of these myths, both in Greek and Western Christian portrayals, often merge into each other. So I'll just quickly go through. You'll have heard of Atlas before, but Atlas stands before the clear voice Hesperides at the ends of the earth. He labours under the heaviest of obligations, the wide heavens pressed down on his head and hands without rest. Such was the duty allotted to him by the cunningly intelligent Zeus. So the idea that Atlas holds up the world, that was his punishment. Subtle planning Prometheus, so this is the important bit. Shackled by Zeus with punishments unbreakable and excruciating, Zeus drove a spike right through his chest and sent a long-winged eagle to torture him. Again and again the eagle gorged on his immortal liver. That happens if you drink too much Guinness as well. Every day the long-winged bird feasted, but each night the liver grew back exactly as before. It's wishful thinking. But it's what's interesting, so this is the Prometheus. There we are. The idea, the eagle gorge on his immortal liver. I just wanted to make the point that Zeus drove a spike right through his chest. I mentioned the way in which Western Christian tradition and Western Greek mythology sometimes merge, or of obviously there's perhaps a cross fertilization, but this looks quite Christ-like, doesn't it? This is called Prometheus being chained by Vulcan by an artist called Dirk van Baburen, 1623, a Dutch artist. And then this is the punishment of eternally having your liver nibbled at by an eagle. This is an artist called Pavel Karlovich, Prometheus Chained, from 1892. And this is quite gruesome. This is Theodore Rombo from Antwerp, and they estimate this was 1627 to 8. So pretty horrendous. So this notion of a sacrifice, why was Prometheus punished that, terrible way? It was partly because he stole fire and gave it to humankind from the gods. But also he did this trick with meat when there was a sacrifice. He offered Zeus the choice. He got all the fat and hid the bones of the sacrificed animal in the fat, but made it look enticing. And then he hid the meat in the innards, the stomach, and gave Zeus the choice. Zeus saw through the deception, but went along with it, basically so he'd have an excuse to then punish Prometheus later. But it also feeds into, so to speak, it also feeds into the idea that why when they sacrificed animals, the gods only got the bones. This is like a mythological excuse so that people could get to eat the meat that was left over. So anger chased out every other thought and bile choked his heart when, out in the open, he saw the white bones of the bull and their clever arrangement. By that decision, even now, men and women across the earth honour the immortals, offering them the smoke of white bones from blazing altars. Cloud-gathering Zeus spoke, his expression strained. Son of Iapetus, you never miss a chance to show off your intellect, but you're a bit ripe in the head. That's a brilliant phrase. You just can't stop playing tricks. His anger simmered as he said this. Zeus, who knows imperishable plans, from that point onwards, his mind was occupied, plotting a response to the deception. I just ask you to remember that emboldened bit, the smoke of white bones from blazing altars, because at the very end there's a quote from Cormac McCarthy. in which white bones are mentioned. First, so this is what Zeus does. First, he withheld the power of weariless fire from the people of the ash spear, in other words, mortal men, who inhabit the earth. But the helpful son of Iapetus outwitted him by stealing back weariless fire. Though its blaze was clear from far away, he hid it in a hollow fennel stalk. This provocation gnawed at the deepest core of high-thundering Zeus, and his heart again filled with bile when, out in the open, he saw the clear blaze of fire, now in the hands of men. As a trade for the fire, Zeus devised wicked suffering for mankind. The renowned broken-footed smith, that's Hephaestus, moulded earth into the shape of a virginal girl, cheeks blushing modestly according to the plans of Cronos' son. So this is the motivation. This is why Zeus is so angry, because Prometheus steals. It's the trick of the sacrifice, but also the stealing of fire. And what I wanted to emphasize, why this is all relevant to the Frankenstein story, is what's interesting is that Prometheus gives mankind fire. So that's a good thing, but because he's trying to be too clever for his own good, because he's annoyed Zeus, Zeus wreaks havoc on humankind. So that embodies brilliantly the contradiction of technology. The things that humankind creates also come back to haunt us. I'm thinking about AI. I can see horrors happening there. But the idea that we never just advance, that there's always many, things to overcome, and lots of inadvertent, unforeseen suffering from our own creations. So, and again, there are links with the book of Genesis, so the idea of the tree of knowledge. With knowledge, you are then banished, and you have to use that knowledge to survive in the world outside the Garden of Eden. So this is just a depiction. This is Zeus and Ganymede, The Theft of Fire, by Christian Griepenkerl from 1878. So he's a sneaky little light there, running away with. Any hope for this carefree life was concealed by an angry Zeus, his heart filled with bile at crooked-minded Prometheus' deception, his mind focused on a scheme, how to bring painful suffering to mankind. So see what I mean? This is what Prometheus, according to the myth, opened humankind up to. First, Zeus hid fire, but the helpful son of Iapetus, stealing from wise-minded Zeus, gave it back to mankind by hiding in a fennel stalk. Deceiving Zeus, who delights in thunder, in anger, cloud-gathering Zeus addressed him. Son of Iapetus, you never miss a chance to show off your intellect. You're pleased with yourself because you stole fire and outwitted me. This will prove disastrous for you, for mankind too. In exchange for fire, I'll devise a truly wicked trade, a gift all will choose to accept with open arms, willingly embracing their own suffering. As he said this, he couldn't stop laughing, the father of men and gods. And this is what I was saying earlier on, because he's about to describe how he's going to give women to mankind. So it's quite misogynistic. That's the punishment. And that's why I said earlier, I think Mary Shelley, to some extent, is depicting a weak-willed Victor Frankenstein as some almost type of response to this type of misogyny. All was arranged invitingly against her naked skin, so this is Pandora being created by Pallas Athena, but in her breast, Hermes the guide, watchdog slayer, installed a tricky, lying tongue and a criminal's heart. So Hesiod was, to say it was a bit misogynistic, is an understatement. All was done according to the plans of loud thundering Zeus. Last of all, the god's messenger placed a voice in her and announced her name, Pandora, because all the Olympian gods gave her gifts, though she would be a plague for labouring men. Finally, when he had completed his inescapable trap, irresistible to men, Father Zeus sent out Hermes, the watchdog slayer, to Epimetheus. The swift messenger of the gods brought the gift, but Epimetheus only considered in hindsight Prometheus's forewarning. Never accept gifts from Olympian Zeus. Send everything back. Don't bring it into your house, or I fear mortals will suffer for it. Only after Epimetheus accepted the gift, after he held suffering in his arms, did he understand. So this is Epimetheus. He's fated only to have hindsight when it's all too late, which again is a human characteristic. Before, all men across the earth used to prosper, free from suffering, hard work, and painful disease. For men, these are death bringers, because those who weather these evils become old before their time. Then the woman removes, so Pandora removed the heavy lid of the jar with her own hands, and driven by her own thoughts, unleashed sorrows for men, death bringers. Hope alone remained in its unbreakable home, caught underneath the lip of the jar. Its escape was only a short flight away, but just in time she slammed the lid down. So again, for me, this is a metaphor. We only ever see the effects of technology too late, and the way that Pandora, the last thing that stays in Pandora's jar is hope. And as a long life football fan, I'm well familiar with the idea it's the hope that kills you. All according to the plan of aegis-bearing, cloud-gathering Zeus. So this is the authority that Prometheus has rebelled against. This is the authority, in a way, Victor Frankenstein and other scientists are rebelling against in their pursuit of knowledge. It's definitely the type of authority that Captain Ahab rejects. And then in Blood Meridian, you've got this horrible character, Judge Holden, the judge. And he is this Captain Ahab, rejecter of any supreme authority above him. So, to bring this on to other literature, now 10,000 or more sorrows roam free among all mankind. Suffering is inescapable on land and sea. Worse, diseases stalk human beings day and night, spreading everywhere, out of control, which is very topical in an era of COVID, Ebola, and whatnot. For men, they bring wails of grief silently, since their divine voice was removed by cunningly wise Zeus. So, according to mythology, all of this is the result of Prometheus giving humankind technological ability. The moral in the end, there is no way to evade the mind of Zeus. And that, by the end of Frankenstein, you're wondering, is that Mary Shelley's message? Because everyone who tries to go against nature comes a cropper. But to link this with John Milton, Paradise Lost, there's the epigraph. In the actual novel, the creature says to Victor Frankenstein, he confronts him, and he quotes from the 3 books. Is it Plutarch's Lives, Goethe's The Sorrows of Young Werther, and then there's Paradise Lost that the creature's read. So he's read a lot more than most current-day undergraduates already. He quotes back at Victor Frankenstein, I ought to be thy Adam, but I am rather the fallen angel, whom thou drivest from joy for no misdeed. Everywhere I see bliss from which I alone am irrevocably excluded. I was benevolent and good. Misery made me a fiend. Make me happy, and I shall again be virtuous. And this picture here it's Lucifer being sent down from heaven, and this is Gustave Doré, which I've shown on the channel before. So this is beautiful Gustave Doré. This is the Prometheus type Lucifer being expelled from, like Prometheus was punished by Zeus, this is Lucifer being expelled from heaven. And this is one of the reference points. So this is how Lucifer got his name. This is Isaiah from the Old Testament. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? This is actually a mocking of, there's a king of Babylon called, was it Hillel? And Hillel means, it's a Hebrew phrase meaning the shining one, or I think the morning star. And there's Saint Jerome in the 4th century. He translated that in Latin as Lucifer, which is a combination of lux, light, and fere, to bring. So Lucifer is the bringer of light. So you can see how Lucifer in Paradise Lost has similarities with Prometheus from Greek mythology, and Mary Shelley is seeing Victor Frankenstein as a modern Prometheus. So this is how all these things tie together. So Lucifer says, "We know no time when we were not as now. No, none before us, self-begot, self-raised by our own quickening power. When fatal course had circled his full orb, the birth mature of this our native heaven, ethereal sons, our puissance is our own right hand shall teach us highest deeds, by proof to try who is our equal." So I've included this because shortly I'll be showing you Captain Ahab, who basically, I think, references this point. The idea that they are self-begot, self-raised by our own quickening power. Again, it's all done in biblical theological terms, but Lucifer complaining to God, or trying to convince the hordes of his supporters that we are self-begot, self-raised by our own quickening power. It's this constant argument against the idea to have to bow down to any other type of authority. Our puissance is our own. And again, if you think of this in terms of Victor Frankenstein, this is a more extreme form. Captain Ahab and Lucifer are a more extreme form of what Victor Frankenstein tries to do, but basically is too wimpy to follow through on. So mixed with obdurate pride and steadfast hate, at once as far as angels ken he views, and ken just means sight. The dismal situation, waste and wild, a dungeon horrible on all sides round, as one great furnace flamed, yet from those flames no light, but rather darkness visible, served only to discover sights of woe, regions of sorrow, doleful shades where peace and rest can never dwell. Hope never comes, that comes to all but torture without end, still urges, and a fiery deluge fed with ever-burning sulphur unconsumed. Such place eternal justice had prepared for all for those rebellious, here their prison ordained in utter darkness, and their portion set as far removed from God and light of heaven as from the centre thrice to the utmost pole. And that's a beautiful emboldened phrase. Yet from those flames no light, but rather darkness visible, which again I interpret as a metaphor for science sheds light, but when it forgets human attributes, it's dark, it's no light, but rather darkness visible. So there's this constant tension in human endeavour. When we see through scientific knowledge, what are we actually seeing? Are we seeing everything? Or is it rather darkness visible? And the torture without end, I'm just highlighting these to show the Prometheus links. Prometheus tortured without end, a fiery deluge fed with ever-burning sulphur unconsumed. Remember the phrase about when Prometheus stole the weariless fire. It's a fire that doesn't go out. And then finally, this utmost pole, it just reminded me of Robert Walton going to the North Pole. That's where he's drawn for knowledge. So stretched out, huge in length, the arch fiend, so this is Lucifer, lay chained on the burning lake, again Prometheus-like, nor ever thence had risen or heaved his head, but that the will and high permission of all ruling heaven left him at large to his own dark designs. Forthwith upright he rears from off the pool his mighty stature, on each hand the flames driven backward slope their pointing spires, and rolled in billows, leave of the midst a horrid veil. Then with expanded wings he steers his flight, aloft, incumbent on the dusky air, that felt unusual weight, till on dry land he lights, as if were land that ever burned with solid, as the lake with liquid fire. So liquid fire, the St. Elmo's fire type thing that I started with, and I'm going to show with reference to Captain Ahab. But also I've emboldened that his mighty stature, on each hand the flames driven backward slope their pointing spires. I'm about to read you shortly an excerpt from Moby Dick where the St. Elmo's fire is on the masts of the ship, and showing absolutely no fear, Captain Ahab picks up the lightning chain. So he's trying to control, but it's in language very close to this. For while they sit contriving, shall the rest, millions that stand in arms. So this is Lucifer speaking. He's trying to rally his troops. Millions that stand in arms and longing wait the signal to ascend. Sit lingering there, heaven's fugitives, and for their dwelling place accept this dark opprobrious den of shame, the prison of his tyranny who reigns by our delay? No, let us rather choose, armed with hell flames and fury all at once, o'er heaven's higher towers to force resistless way, turning our tortures into horrid arms against the torturer. When, to meet the noise of his almighty engine, he shall hear infernal thunder, and for lightning see black fire, and horror shot with equal rage among his angels, and his throne itself mix with Tartarean sulphur and strange fire, his own invented torments. So the idea is that Lucifer wants to turn against God, his own power, his own lightning, infernal thunder, black fire and horror. And this is, again, if you think of technology, if in mythical terms, the gift of fire from Prometheus, it's got this double-edged quality. We're trying to use it back against where it came from. One spirit in them ruled, and this is when Christ then responds and attacks the hordes of the rebellious Lucifer's hordes. One spirit in them ruled, and every eye glared lightning and shot forth pernicious fire. Among the accursed that withered all their strength, and of their wonted vigour left them drained, exhausted, spiritless, afflicted, fallen. Yet half his strength he put not forth, but checked his thunder in mid-volley, for he meant not to destroy, but root them out of heaven. The overthrown he raised, and as a herd of goats or timorous flock together thronged, drove them before him thunderstruck, pursued with terrors and with furies to the bounds and crystal wall of heaven, which opening wide rolled inward, and a spacious gap disclosed into the wasteful deep. The monstrous sight struck them with horror backward, but far worse, urged them behind. Headlong themselves they threw down from the verge of heaven. Eternal wrath burnt after them to the bottomless pit. So this is the punishment. It's Lucifer being chucked out of heaven with his hordes. But I've emboldened this bit, as a herd of goats or timorous flock together thronged, drove them before him thunderstruck. This is the ambivalence of these type of stories, because in Captain Ahab refuses to be part of the herd. The judge in Blood Meridian similarly. So on the one hand, they're deeply demonic, troubling characters, but on the other hand, they refuse to go with the herd. So again, it's part of human nature. It's this, is it better to go with the herd? I've forgotten the exact phrase, but Lucifer basically says it's better to rule in hell than to be ruled in heaven. There are important issues here about human autonomy, human self-assertion, that I think we can sometimes forget. Because, at the end of the day, it is Lucifer we're talking about. But this is, to start wrapping things up, but looking at, this is St. Elmo's fire from the cockpit of a plane. And to link it with this excerpt from Moby Dick. O thou clear spirit of clear fire, whom on these seas I as a Persian once did worship, till in the sacramental act so burned by thee that to this hour I bear the scar. I now know thee, thou clear spirit, and I now know that thy right worship is defiance. To neither love nor reverence wilt thou be kind, and even for hate thou canst but kill, and all are killed. No fearless fool now fronts thee. I own thy speechless, placeless power, but to the last gasp of my earthquake life will dispute its unconditional, unintegral mastery in me. In the midst of the personified impersonal, a personality stands here, though but a point at best. Wheresoever I came, wheresoever I go, yet while I earthly live, the queenly personality lives in me, and feels her royal rights. But war is pain and hate is woe. Come in thy lowest form of love, and I will kneel and kiss thee. But at thy highest, come as mere supernal power, and though thou launches navies of full-freighted worlds, there's that in here that still remains indifferent. O thou clear spirit, of thy of thy fire thou madest me, and like a true child of fire, I breathe it back to thee. This is one of the most powerful statements of just, it's like Prometheus rebelling against Zeus. And the absolute refusal, thy right worship is defiance. I own thy speechless, placeless power. The last gasp of my earthquake life will dispute its unconditional, unintegral mastery in me. So in the Genesis myth, in the myth of Prometheus, there's this defiance is partly what makes humans human beings. But just to explain this, I think it's a fascinating sentence here. The queenly personality lives in me and feels her royal rights. I won't go too far into it. We don't have time. Maybe another time if you're interested in the Gnostic aspects of this. But in Gnosticism, there's this idea there's a supreme, purely spiritual being. And then there's the earth of matter, of physical materiality. And that was created by a demiurge, the creator, who doesn't realize he's not the supreme being. But there's yet another ejection from heaven type story, because in Gnosticism, Sophia is the partner, the feminine counterpart of the supreme being. But her sin is to try and have a thought without the supreme being, to have an independent thought. And because of that, she has to leave the realm of pure spirituality. And I think this is the fiery father that is the Gnostic creator. And the missing, where does it say? I'm just looking for the queenly personality lives in me. I think later on in the next slide he talks about his missing his sweet mother. But this is more, again, from a plane. If you've ever seen sorry to give a daft example, but this reminds me of if you've ever had your eye x-rayed and seen an x-ray of your own eye. These are like the filaments. Yeah, this is the thing I was looking to for the parentage issue. I own thy speechless, placeless power, said I not so? Nor was it wrung from me, nor do I now drop these links. Thou canst blind, but I can then grope. Thou canst consume, but I can then be ashes. Take the homage of these poor eyes and shutter hands. I would not take it. The lightning flashes through my skull. Mine eyeballs ache and ache. My whole beaten brain seems as beheaded and rolling on some stunning ground. Oh, oh, yet blindfold, yet I will talk to thee. Light though thou be, thou leapest out of darkness, but I am darkness leaping out of light, leaping out of thee. The javelins cease, open eyes, see or not, there burn the flames. O thou magnanimous, now do I glory in my genealogy. But thou art but my fiery father, my sweet mother I know not. O cruel, what hast thou done with her? There lies my puzzle, but thine is greater. So just to recap, the demiurge is like this blind mechanical power who tyrannized over the spiritual life of humanity. And that is almost like the embodiment of technology, the scientific method that allows no humanity. And then Ahab's referencing this fiery spirit as the heavenly Sophia. The spiritual word is called pleroma. It's this pure spirit. And that's where Sophia was kicked out of or had to leave. And that's his sweet mother. That's when he talks about his queenly nature and his fiery father. So again, it's very much like Prometheus, the idea of Zeus. And just to give you because I don't think I was particularly clear there, but just to give you the actual, another one bites the dust, another one being kicked out of Pleroma, this idea of the spiritual world. So this divine realm of fullness, like the Garden of Eden, perfection. And Sophia gets kicked out because of her obsession to comprehend the unknowable supreme God. So I said earlier, she tries to create a thought without the supreme being and is kicked out of the Pleroma. Now, this is the interesting bit for Frankenstein. Sophia's spiritual essence, pneuma, subtly infused into the material world, meaning that sparks of the divine pleroma are trapped within human souls. So when Dr. Frankenstein's talking about the spark of life, this is one of the remnants of the Gnostic tradition. The idea is that we have little sparks within us of divine knowledge. And I'm pretty sure it's a theme in Judaism's theology. I've come across that before. But this notion of the demiurge, so remember there's the supreme being that is purely spiritual. The demiurge is a powerful creator, but he thinks he is the supreme being and he's mistaken. And I just see this as having relevance to this blind mechanical power is what Victor Frankenstein seeks. Another St. Elmo's fire. So again, Captain Ahab, thou knowest not how came ye, hence callest thyself unbegotten. Remember Lucifer in Paradise Lost, he said, self-begotten, I think he said. Certainly knowest not thy beginning, hence callest thyself unbegun. I know that of me, which thou knowest not of thyself, O thou omnipotent. There is some unsuffusing thing beyond thee, thou clear spirit, to whom all thy eternity is but time, all thy creativeness mechanical. Through thee, thy flaming self, my scorched eyes do dimly see it. O thou foundling fire, thou hermit immemorial, thou too hast thy incommunicable riddle, thy unparticipated grief. Here again with haughty agony I read my sire. Leap, leap up and lick the sky. I leap with thee, I burn with thee, would fain be welded with thee, defyingly I worship thee. So he's putting himself, this is the Captain Ahab, like Prometheus, like Lucifer. Their one redeeming feature is their absolute refusal to give in to authority. And I totally understand they take it too far. After all, like I say, to repeat myself, he is called Lucifer. But at the same time, this Lucifer, the bringer of light, it's a different light too, pure eternal light. But it's the light, this creativeness mechanical, that human beings have to make do with. Except Captain Ahab here is just rejecting, he won't follow the herd. And I want to compare it with this from the creature in Frankenstein, who says, when I call over the frightful catalogue of my deeds, I cannot believe that I am he whose thoughts are once filled with sublime and transcendent visions of the beauty and the majesty of goodness. But it is even so, the fallen angel becomes a malignant devil. Yet even that enemy of God and man had friends and associates in his desolation. I am quite alone. And what I find interesting is Captain Ahab could be contrasted with the creature here in Frankenstein. The creature wants to be good and he wants to be reconciled with his creator. Captain Ahab's basically saying to his creator, sod you, I won't submit. This is a picture I got, the cadets on the Coast Guard cutter Bark Eagle, and this is the North Atlantic Ocean in 2017, and this is St. Elmo's fire in the sky. The boat, cried Starbuck. Look at thy boat, old man. Ahab's harpoon, the one forged at Perth's fire, remained firmly lashed in its conspicuous crotch, so that it projected beyond his whale-boat's bow. But the sea that had stove its bottom had caused the loose leather sheath to drop off, and from the keen steel barb there now came a levelled flame of pale, forked fire. As the silent harpoon burned there like a serpent's tongue, Starbuck grasped Ahab by the arm. God is against the old man. Forbear. 'Tis an ill voyage, ill begun, ill continued. Let me square the yards while we may, old man, and make a fair wind of it homewards, to go on a better voyage than this. Squaring the yards is just getting the sails perpendicular behind the wind so they can go at the fastest speed. Overhearing Starbuck, the panic-stricken crew instantly ran to the braces, though not a sail was left aloft. For the moment, all the aghast mates' thoughts seemed theirs. They raised a half-mutinous cry, but dashing the rattling lightning links to the deck and snatching the burning harpoon, Ahab waved it like a torch among them, swearing to transfix with it the first sailor that but cast loose a rope's end. Petrified by his aspect, and still more shrinking from the fiery dart that he held, the men fell back in dismay, and Ahab again spoke. All your oaths to hunt the white whale are as binding as mine, and heart, soul, and body, lungs, and life, old Ahab is bound. And that ye may know to what tune this heart beats, look ye here, thus I blow out the last fear. And with one blast of his breath he extinguished the flame. As in the hurricane that sweeps the plain, men fly the neighbourhood of some lone gigantic elm, whose very height and strength but render it so much the more unsafe, because so much the more a mark for thunderbolts. So at those last words of Ahab's, many of the mariners did run from him in a terror of dismay. So the old Ahab is bound is again like Prometheus bound. And that, remember the tree being split that fascinated Victor Frankenstein when he was 15 years old. Ahab makes himself available to be like the tree. He's not scared of the thunderbolts. This is St. Elmo's fire scene on. This is an electrical substation. Now I'm just going to finish off now with a few quotes from Cormac McCarthy, which I think link to all the things you've seen before, just to show how the notion of the Promethean fire within us continues throughout literature. So this is the title character is called Arthur Ownby. The old man kept to his course over last year's leaves slick with water, hopping and dancing wildly among the maelstrom of riotous greenery, like some rain sprite, burned out of the near darkness in antic configuration against the quick bloom of the lightning. As he passed it thus, a barren chestnut silver under the sluice of rain erupted to the heart and spewed out sawdust and scorched mice upon him. A slab fell away with a long hiss, like a burning mast tilting seaward. He is down. A clash of shields rings, and Valkyrie descend with cat's cries to bear him away. Already a rivulet is packing clay in one ragged cuff, and a quiff of white hair, depending from his forelock, reddens in the seeping mud. So this is all a burning mass tilting seaward. He's hit by the lightning that Ahab defies. But I'm just showing you how I just think in McCarthy's work, lightning is this lightning of the gods is a recurrent theme, and mankind's either suffering from it or defiance of it. So this is from Out of Dark. Oh, this is a horrible bit. The context is the character Culler has had an incestuous child with his sister, and he abandons the child in some swampland. When he crashed into the glade, and this is him, he leaves the child and then tries to get away, and he's disorientated, and he returns back inadvertently to where he left the child. So when he crashed into the glade among the cottonwoods, he fell headlong and lay there with his cheek to the earth. And as he lay there, a far crack of lightning went bluely down the sky and bequeathed him in an embryonic bird's first fissured vision of the world, and transpiring instant and outrageous from dark to dark, a final view of the grotto and the shapeless white plasm struggling upon the rich and incunabula moss like a lank swamp hare. He would have taken it for some boneless cognate of his heart's dread had the child not cried. It howled execration upon the dim Camarine world of its nativity wail on wail, while he lay there gibbering with palsied jaw hasps, his hands putting back the night like some witless paraclete beleaguered with all limbo's clamour. It's a horrible image, and apologies for incunabula. I always trip up on one word or another. But it's the images, so the bird's first fissured vision of the world. He talks about the lightning. You get a sudden flash, and he's comparing that to an embryonic bird, and then you've got the abandoned, newly born baby resonating with the description embryonic. McCarthy is a dark writer. This is from Sutri. It cracked and boomed about, and he pointed out the darkened heart within him and cried for light. If there be any art in the weathers of this earth, or char these bones to coal, if you can, a blackened rag in the rain, he sat with his back to a tree and watched the storm move on over the city. Am I a monster? Are there monsters in me? So this just reminded me, he's in a suicidal mood. But this idea of monsters within us, the lightning, Victor Frankenstein, he exhibited, or he externalized the monster within himself. But then there was the monster of inconsistency. There was the monster of rejection that made him fail to look after his own creature. And this is Blood Meridian. They cut the throats of the pack animals and jerked and divided the meat, and they travelled under the cape of the wild mountains upon a broad soda plain with dry thunder to the south and rumours of light. Under a gibbous moon, horse and rider spancelled to their shadows on the snow-blue ground, and in each flare of lightning as the storm advanced, those self-same forms rearing with a terrible redundancy behind them, like some third aspect of their presence, hammered out black and wild upon the naked grounds, they rode on. They rode like men invested with a purpose whose origins were antecedent to them, like blood legatees of an order both imperative and remote. For although each man among them was discreet unto himself, conjoined they made a thing that had not been before, and in that communal soul were wastes hardly reckonable more than those whited regions on old maps where monsters do live, and where there is nothing other of the known world save conjectural winds. So McCarthy's describing the desert in the New Mexico type area, but notice how similar it is to the description in Frankenstein of Robert Walton and Dr. Frankenstein's trip to the North Pole. And talking about poles, this is called the Lightning Field and was made in 1977, and it's an American sculptor, Walter de Maria, and it's western New Mexico. But the idea is that if the atmospheric conditions are conducive, these poles would attract St. Elmo's fire type phenomenon. But even if they don't, the idea is you're in this desolate area, but there's this framework of human intervention. So all the way through, I've been trying to emphasize, you've got the lightning of the gods, you've got people, human beings, rejecting, standing up against. And you've got desolate areas in which they stand against the power of the gods. And there's at least one academic paper I was reading claims that McCarthy might have been influenced by this artwork. So this is the final epilogue of Blood Meridian. All night, sheet lightning quakes sourceless to the west beyond the midnight thunderheads, making a bluish day of the distant desert. The mountains on the southern skyline stark and black and livid, like a land of some other order out there whose true geology was not stone but fear. The thunder moved up from the southwest, and lightning lit the desert all about them, blue and barren. Great clanging reaches ordered out of the absolute night, like some demon kingdom summoned up, or changeling land that come the day would leave them neither trace nor smoke nor ruin more than any troubling dream. Remember the troubling dream at the Mary Shelley's introduction. So in the dawn there is a man progressing over the plain. Sorry, I'm not sure whether that's the actual epilogue. That's towards the end. Apologies if that's not actually in the epilogue to Blood Meridian. I think I might have made a mistake there. But this is definitely the epilogue. In the dawn there is a man progressing over the plain by means of holes which he is making in the ground. He uses an implement with two handles, and he chucks it into the hole, and he enkindles the stone in the hole with a steel hole by hole, striking the fire out of the rock which God has put there. On the plain behind him are the wanderers in search of bones, and those who do not search, and they move haltingly in the light like mechanisms whose movements are monitored with escapement and palate, so that they appear restrained by prudence or reflectiveness which has no inner reality, and they cross in their progress one by one that track of holes that runs to the rim of the visible ground, and which seems less the pursuit of some continuance than the verification of a principle, a validation of sequence and causality, as if each round and perfect hole owed its existence to the one before it, there on that prairie, upon which are the bones and the gatherers of bones, and those who do not gather. He strikes fire in the hole and draws out his steel. Then they all move on again. And I just think that's picks up a lot of the themes in the actual talk I've done. The Promethean idea of referred to where are we here, where he strikes fire in the hole and draws out his steel. But in the context of the novel, you've had this Dionysian mad judge, and at the end of the novel, one interpretation is, despite all that evil, again the judge is like a Captain Ahab character who defies God. But against all of that, you've still got this allusion to Prometheus and the fire and what civilization does. These holes are being dug in a predictable pattern. Fence posts are probably going up. So amidst all this wild, Zeus-like dominated wilderness, there's still this Promethean fire within us that the hope, remember, is the last thing that stays in Pandora's jar, but the hope that human ingenuity and human Promethean curiosity can overcome the worst that's been traced in Blood Meridian. So, Zeus-like, I appear with lightning below me, and I know that went on for quite a while. I hope you stayed with me as long as you could, and I hope I will try and parcel up this talk so that I will dig out some of the key points, but I hope you can see how these pieces of literature all allude to each other and how you can see them all imbricated or interwoven, and how the notion of Promethean fire is just an integral part of human ingenuity and human cunning and human purpose. And I think it exists in Frankenstein, and that's why it's such a powerful novel. So thanks very much. Till the next time. All the very best.